Good morning and welcome everyone to the final session of today. And I'm sure like me, you've been glued to your laptop or your mobile phone all morning, listening to our experts. And we have saved the best till last, I do have to say. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce our guest for our final session, which is all about, as Lauren said, the how, setting measurable sustainability objectives for our events. So I hope you can join me. I learned last week that a general round of applause online is this. And welcome Abena Poku-Awuah from CEO from Legacy to this event. Good morning, Abena. How are you today?
Hi, Samme. I'm really well. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
It's so exciting that we're reunited on screen. I had the pleasure of interviewing you back in Event Lab face-to-face in October last year. So it'll be great to continue our conversation. For those who didn't join us then, Abena, could you just give us a bit of insight into what Legacy does and your background? And whilst you're doing that, can I ask everybody to please answer that first poll? We want to ensure we get the best information and expertise out of Abena for you. So please answer that poll and please start getting your questions. Abena, over to you.
Thanks, Samme. So yes, we met last October, BC, and I am a scientist by training. I've worked in sustainability for 15 years, helping companies become more sustainable in terms of their operations and their corporate strategies. And I noticed a disconnect between what the companies were saying at corporate level in terms of their strategies. They had some really bold ambitions to become zero carbon, zero waste, whatever, and this wasn't being translated to their events. And so I could see that the events industry was a little bit behind some other sectors in terms of sustainability. So I thought I'd bring some of my sustainability experience and my love of events to the sector. So I started Legacy 3.5 years ago now. We're a small team, and what we do is we help companies be more sustainable. So we help them reduce their environmental impact, and we help them create events that also create positive social change.
You were saying that 3.5 years ago, you saw that need because the event industry was behind. So fast forward to where we are today in June 2020. What's the landscape looking, just so that we can set that scene?
The landscape's looking a lot more positive, I have to say. Back in 2016, in terms of events, we were still having to persuade people why running more sustainable events was good for business and good for your bottom line. I think now people get it. They realize that sustainability is not a trend, it's here to stay. And it's also that it's everyone's responsibility. So as the event sector has to contribute its part as well to dealing with some of the massive environmental challenges that we face at the moment.
And we'll go on and we'll talk about that. Just to sort of see the results of the first poll, Abena, 45% are saying yes, that they are setting sustainable goals or metrics. 36% are saying not yet, but we plan to. 14% saying no, 5% not sure. If we can launch our second poll, because I think it would be great for Abena to hear what's the barrier for that 36%. Do those scores surprise you?
I think they're great. It's good to see that people are taking sustainability seriously, and nearly half of the people who are answering the poll are taking practical steps to improve their sustainability. So it's not just a statement, they're actually embedding it into their plans. So that's really great to hear.
It's certainly a number. I think if when we were talking just in the green room beforehand, we weren't sure it was going to be that high. I think that 36% we want to help as well as that 45%. And of course, we want to convert the 14 and the 5% into positive ones. Have you got, and I'm sure you can talk about this all day, we only have a short amount of time, but do you have some examples? Because I think best practice in our industry is super important. Do you have any examples of events that you've worked with or that can show and demonstrate best practice in really dramatically reducing carbon footprint, becoming carbon neutral? Are there some examples out there?
That's a really difficult question to ask, as with all sustainability. So sustainability is a really broad subject. It covers obviously carbon emissions and climate change, but it also covers your water use, transport, and also your social behaviour, so how you work with the communities that your event's involved with. So looking at your carbon footprint, so generally the way an event produces carbon emissions is by burning fossil fuels. And so an event usually does that when the venue is heated and powered, or when you burn petrol to transport all your delegates to a location. So you can see it's really difficult for an event to have a zero carbon footprint unless you don't. It's very difficult to do unless you don't have delegates traveling, or unless you've worked with your venue to make sure that their footprint is zero. So it's a slight cop-out answer, but the best event in terms of carbon footprint is actually a virtual event. And there's one in 2018. It was a climate change conference which was held completely online, live streamed. And so just to give you an example of the impacts, they reduced their impact by 99.9% just by having the event solely online. So if you're talking about having a zero carbon event, really the only way to do it is to not have people traveling to your event. But lots of other events are doing really well in terms of waste as well. So if you look at Sustainable Brands in Paris, their event last year managed to reduce their waste by 98% by all kinds of strategies. So looking at their food waste, making sure that they rented furniture, and any furniture they weren't able to rent, they gave to local charities or to homeless shelters. They made sure there was no single-use plastic on site. They just made sure that everything they procured for their event had an end route, a disposal place. And so that was really effective.
So when it comes down to sort of the crunch, setting objectives, we set business objectives throughout our day-to-day lives. We set event objectives. We are talking about ROI. So let's bring it down to that sort of nuts and bolts of sustainability metrics and objectives. We see lots of examples. We've seen them this morning, some great chat going on throughout today's event around small steps, setting small objectives and then building up to those bigger ones. Would you agree that's a good strategy? Would you recommend that?
We hear a lot about people taking small steps and working their way onto bigger steps. With my experience, that's actually not the most effective way to go, just because it takes a lot of effort even to take the small steps. You have to persuade your stakeholders, you have to persuade your management, you have to agree a budget. In my experience, it's best to go big, go bold, go for the big change, because if you do that, the small steps will happen anyway as part of your big dramatic change. So actually the most effective strategies are the ones that tackle the big hairy goals first and then include the small steps alongside that. So it's not a popular opinion and it's more difficult, but if you're going to exude the political capital anyway, you might as well go big or go home, really, I think.
I think that's really bold, and I think a lot of event organisers, and love to hear from you in the chat, will probably go, oh, our stakeholders don't want to discuss this. I think we have to go beyond that conversation. So when you're talking about setting those sort of really high goals, have you got an example or a couple of examples of what they could be, so that we could understand how to frame those other goals underneath it?
Yeah, absolutely. So to take waste, which is a really important issue for the event sector, a small goal might be something like, we are going to eliminate plastic straws for our next event, which is a noble goal. A big goal might be that we are going zero waste for this event. You can see as part of going zero waste for the event, you're going to deal with your problem of plastic straws, but it's an exciting goal. It's a way to get everyone involved and really excited about what you're doing. So that would be an example of where setting the big goal will tackle the smaller goals anyway, but bring people alongside with you.
I had a great question come in from Gemma, because I was going to ask this sort of on the tack. Carbon offsetting, we hear this a lot. We hear it in the media. It's a sexy title. We were, up until 3 months ago, all jumping on planes for short periods of time to attend meetings and events. Gemma's asking, Abena, what are your thoughts on carbon offsetting? Is it just greenwashing?
This is a whole subject in itself. I'm going to try and be brief. Yeah. There's an inherent contradiction with events, and I love events and I love live events, but if you are going to bring people to your events, you are going to have a carbon impact until someone hurries up and creates carbon neutral airplanes. So knowing that you're going to have a carbon impact for your events, the first thing you should do is reduce all the other impacts on site as much as you can, and then only then should you look at carbon offsetting. I think what a lot of people do is say, I want my event to be zero carbon, so they go straight to a carbon offsetting scheme without reducing any of their other impacts. And then you could say it is greenwashing, because you're not really reducing your impact, you're literally offsetting it. And what we should be doing with carbon is reducing our impact to zero anyway, and almost inherently with carbon offsetting, you're not reducing to zero, you're keeping it the same. So yeah, I think it's, like I said, until we are able to fly in a carbon neutral way, carbon offsetting has to be a part of the solution, but it should be the last resort, not the first.
Thank you. That's a really, really great answer to a very, very big question. And thank you, Gemma, for asking that one. We've got a response to our barriers to setting metrics that I'd like to touch on with your expertise, Abena, because 30% of our audience are saying one of the barriers to setting metrics for your events are simply, I don't know where to start. Running through, we've got a big amount, again, 45% of our colleagues here, the ability to effectively track progress. And then the others communicating this a small amount, stakeholder buy-in. Luckily, stakeholder buy-in is just at 10%. But those are big, big questions. People don't know where to start, and they don't know how to effectively track. Where can they find this information? How can we get people starting after we've finished the session today?
Yeah, I completely hear that. And it's a real problem. There's a real lack of data in the industry, and there's a real lack of places just to get jargon-free, simple to understand knowledge. And it can be a technical subject. And sustainability is a broad subject. We can't all be experts in climate change, waste, water, etc. So what we do at Legacy is we think of sustainability using 9 themes. So they range from energy and carbon, through to transport, through to community, through to water, food and drink. So the themes are on the Legacy website. My first tip would be, don't try and tackle all of sustainability at one time. It's better to do a really good job on 1 or 2 themes, first of all, than to do a half-hearted job on all of the themes of sustainability. So focus is the first tip. The second tip is, once you've chosen what themes you're going to look at, then there is a little bit of technical work involved in understanding what the metrics are for that particular theme. So if it's climate change that you're interested in, your metric is carbon emissions. So you need to find a way of measuring your carbon emissions. If it's waste, then your metric is probably kilograms of waste. So you need to find a way of measuring your kilograms of waste. If your theme is something more socially inclined, like community, your metric might be, how diverse are my panels? Or how many people from the local community were invited? Or how many businesses did I support? So set your metric according to the theme that you're focused on. Probably the 2 most serious environmental issues that we're facing are climate change and waste. So those would be good ones to look at, even though they are really difficult. There are various online calculators to calculate your carbon emissions. I think the My Climate website has one that you can plug in details of your event, and it will give you kind of an overall carbon impact. But like I said, if you've got an event where people are traveling internationally, your carbon impact will be overwhelmingly due to their flights, and so that one's difficult to reduce. Looking at waste, it's a messy job, but unless your venue's measuring your waste for you, you have to do it yourself. We don't really have an industry standard yet or an industry methodology for assessing waste from an event. So it really is just about finding a way as an event planner to weigh that. So it depends on what you're focused on. There are some tools available, but the industry is in its infancy at the moment. So there's not as many tools as I would like to see.
So we need to get that shift and that move into those. And then there are things like, as you said, from the Legacy website, there's understanding the UN SDGs. Some of the communication around that is really quite clear. But again, I think your answer is, it's an overwhelming topic. And that's why people are saying, don't know where to start. Start with 1 or 2 key changes into your event.
And focus. A really good theme to start with is actually using the Legacy themes is food and drink, because that's one that everybody understands.
Yeah,
and it feels more tangible as an event planner to have an effect. So that might be a good theme to start on for the first 12 months. Set some targets around the type of food and drink you're going to serve and how much waste, and go from there.
One of the things I think that Denise has mentioned, thank you, Denise, for this, is promotional gifts at events. Do we really need this? Can we strive to have, no promotional gifts? As she said, as a lot comes from China. Who wants it? Is it the supplier desperately to give a gift in order to get a sale? Or is it that the planners and the buyers have come to expect a goodie bag when they leave an event?
I obviously, working in sustainable events, giveaways are not really, they don't really align with what we're trying to do with events. However, doing some research on what people miss about physical events, one of the top topics that came out was the lack of giveaways, event swag. So that shows that despite what everyone is saying, we all do miss our freebies. That was one of the big bonuses of attending events, is what I'm seeing. So being realistic about how much behavior you can change, it seems that not all events, definitely not. We should look at digital forms, but some events, your attendees are going to want some swag. So if that's the case, it then becomes a matter of what swag has the lowest impact and is going to satisfy those needs. So it doesn't need to be plastic, there's no need for that. But for example, at one event, we gave away plantable seed bombs, and they were really popular. At another event, we gave away food and drink cupcakes that had the client's logo on them. So again, zero waste, but the attendees completely love that. So possibly it's not realistic to expect events to have no swag at all, but there's no reason for that swag not to be sustainable.
To sort of start wrapping things up, I cannot believe that the time goes so quickly. As you said, this is such a big topic. We're grateful for Legacy sort of helping guide us all through. We've had a question in from Alex around the one thing that we were talking about, convincing colleagues who manage events for ages to incorporate sustainable objectives. We were hoping we were past that conversation. We're at a point, so certainly here in the UK, and let's look at the round of the world, with the C word, with the pandemic, with lockdown, that we're all seeing for our, every time we walk outside. I live not far from Gatwick Airport. I don't see a plane anymore. Traffic is considerably reduced. We've already done some really great things in terms of the overall sustainability, thinking about the why behind going back to work for a whole plethora of reasons. Is this the opportunity for us as an industry, as event organisers, to really change this conversation around, stakeholders not buying in?
Yeah, I really hope so. I think for all of us, we're all going to have to completely redo the way we run events. So all of us are having to rip up the rule book and start again to see which events are necessary, how do we run them, how do we design events. So there's no excuse not to incorporate sustainability into that planning now that we all have a blank sheet again. And the second thing I'd say is that you can't hide from this. It's not going away as an issue. Sustainability is only going to become more important, more mainstream, and your clients will expect it. So you might as well get on board now rather than chasing the band later.
So if we can get our 100, 150 participants leaving us in a couple of minutes to go and do one thing and commit to doing one thing, Abena, what would that be?
First thing is, I'm going to completely disregard your question and give two things, if that's okay, Sammy. Sorry.
Two is fine.
So the one thing is, we're event planners, we all love a to-do list. I know that you all have very complicated to-do lists, checklist planners. So the one thing you can go and do is go back to your planners and see where you can build sustainability into them now. And the second cheeky thing I'm going to say is that people kept on telling us that it's really hard to find somewhere to discuss these issues and to share best practice. So we actually have an online discussion forum. It's completely free. It's for event planners to talk about sustainability. So I'd say, if you go on the Legacy website, you'll find a link to the discussion forum. If you have any questions, go on there and ask your questions. And there's a whole community of people there that you can talk to about setting metrics, about what to do, about where to start.
We have all become now used to this world where we are online, we are creating more forums. I'm part of so many sort of remote speaking, online event design. People are wondering about virtual hybrid. We've been discussing these during these sessions. So this is great to hear that there is a forum. Finally, before we say our thanks and our goodbyes and let everybody go and get the coffee, I'd love to launch the final poll, which is, do you feel more confident about setting metrics and discussing the value of setting sustainability objectives after our session today? It would be great if you could answer that poll if you haven't already. My final words are, focus, be positive. I've got takeaways. I commit to doing that, Abena. My grateful thanks to you. Final words over to you, Abena.
Oh, thank you very much for having me and for listening to me. I'm always here to talk about this, so please do get in touch. And just, I suppose my final tip was just start. I know it's daunting, I know it can be technical, but if you just start, you'll get somewhere. You just need to take that first step.
Like the
committing.
famous sneaker company, just do it.
Just
Please
do it,
all
exactly.
just go and do it. Thanks all for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Abena. Thanks to the team at London Filmed and of course Higher Space and Swapcard. And we will see you another time. Take care. Be safe, everyone.